What's up guys, TechLab here. Now in today's video we're going to be showing you how to actually put a gaming PC together. There are a lot of videos out there that say that they show you how to build a gaming PC, and generally what they're doing is they're showing you the different types of parts that you should be using, but they very rarely actually include the steps it takes to put the system together. Now I keep getting a lot of questions from people that are very basic questions in terms of building a PC, so I thought I would answer all of those questions by doing the ultimate step-by-step guide. Now, like I say, the parts for this system are not important. I have just collected enough parts to actually build a modern gaming PC here in 2024. We've got the graphics card, a motherboard, a power supply, who we need to thank Be Quiet for because they actually sent this one across to us for doing a video just like this. It is one of their latest straight power 12 power supplies, 850 watt, probably way more than what this system actually needs, but you should definitely go check them out because they are fantastic quality. I want to thank Be Quiet for sending that across, and I also want to thank Tecware because they actually provided the case for today, which you will see in a bit. Of course, this is an Intel system because we've got an Intel processor here, and we've got our RAM and our NVMe drive, which is going to provide the storage. But before we actually jump straight into building, there are a few things that we need to know up front. If you are going to be building a gaming PC, or any PC for that matter, you will have a choice of different platforms, and the most common ones at the moment are these three here. First, we have the AM4 platform from AMD. That is their older platform, but it is still supported, and they are still actually releasing CPUs for that. A lot of people that are on a budget may want to go that route. Then we have obviously AMD's latest AM5 platform. This is the one that they're going to be using going forward. So if you are going to be building a gaming PC that has a bit of a future, you'll probably have chosen one of these. And then of course we've got Intel's LGA1700, which supports many different Intel sockets, but of course is their latest. That one will be replaced soon. So if you are looking for something that's a little bit more future-proof, you've probably gone for the AM5. But if you're looking for something more on a budget, you've probably gone for one of the others. Now, if you decided to go with AMD's AM4 platform, the socket is a little bit different to the others because it actually uses a PGA system, and what that means is the pins are in on the CPU, whereas the little slots are in the motherboard, and it's pretty simple to install this. All you have to do to install an AM4 CPU is just lift the little arm next to the socket. That will release all of the little locks inside. Make sure the CPU aligns correctly. There are little notifications on the CPU itself as well as the motherboard. Slowly drop it down and align the pins into the board. Once the CPU is actually flat against the panel, all you need to do is then push the little arm down, and that will lock the CPU into place. For AM5, things are a little bit different because they actually changed the socket that they used. AMD were typically known for their PGA systems, but when AM5 came along, they decided to go the same route as Intel with an LGA system. An LGA system means that the CPU itself actually only has little contact pads on it, and the pins are little springs inside the socket themselves. They are a little bit more fragile when it comes to the motherboard, so you do not want to damage them. Don't drop anything on there, which is why you get a little plastic panel on top. Now, we don't need to remove that panel just yet because that will actually remove itself when we install a CPU. To install a CPU inside an AM5 socket, we need to do a similar thing with the AM4 by releasing this little arm here. As we pull that arm back, we will actually have a little flap that pops up. That's what's going to hold our CPU down. We align the CPU to the motherboard. It does have little notches, so you can't get these the wrong way around. And we slowly and gently lower the CPU in just so it touches all of those little spring pins. We do not want to drop this CPU or drop anything inside of it. So of course we have this plastic panel on top. To remove that panel, we want the CPU to do it itself. All we need to do is drop the little panel down. As we release the arm back and we put the pressure onto it to pop it down, the little plastic cover will pop off on its own. Make sure you keep that little plastic panel safe, because if you don't and you want to store the motherboard later, you may get issues with things dropping onto the pins and stuff like that. So make sure you keep those safe. For those of you that decide to go Intel, you do have the option of the LGA1700 socket. Of course, Intel have used LGA systems for a very long time, which are very similar to the AM5. The LGA socket number actually denotes how many little pins or spring pins that the system has. So for LGA1700, it has 1700 pins. And the CPUs are slightly different shape because they are a little bit elongated instead of square. To install an LGA1700 socket CPU, we need to just do the same as what we did for the others, just by pressing down this arm here and releasing it. As we pop that over, the little catch on the top will flip over. It's important to note that these do flip the opposite way to the AM5 sockets, although it's not really that important. We take the CPU just like we did with the AM5 and we slowly drop it down onto those spring-loaded pins. Again, we do not want to damage them, so this one does come with a little plastic cover on, but just like with the AM5, by lowering it back down again, it will actually pop off itself when it hits the CPU, and we pop the arm back down, tuck it back underneath the peg, and we remove the plastic shield. And that is the LGA1700 CPU actually fit inside its socket. Just like the AM5 one, you do not want to lose the little plastic cap here, because if you do want to store the motherboard, or maybe you want to sell it later on and ship it, you will want to pop that back on again. Very simple to pop back on. Once you actually close the little door, you can click them, just put straight back onto the top of the socket, and it just keeps everything safe. Now that you know how to install different socket CPUs, we're going to carry on with the main build, and we're going to be using this. This is a Gigabyte B660 motherboard. It is an LGA1700 and goes with the rest of the setup that we're going to be using. I've actually installed the CPU here, but we need to move on to the next step. The next thing that I like to install is, of course, the cooler, and for that we're going to be using a stock Intel cooler, because that's what most of your CPUs are going to come with. Intel LGA1700 comes with a slightly different cooler to the previous generations. They do look pretty smart, but they don't perform very well. If you do want a video on specific coolers, maybe tower coolers or all-in-one coolers, we can do that. Make sure you let me know in the comments below. But apart from that, you should always follow the instructions that come with your cooler, or search for a video that is specifically about fitting that one, and that way you're not going to make any mistakes. Now generally an Intel stock cooler will come with its own thermal paste, because of course we need thermal paste. Thermal paste comes in many different forms. I actually have this super cheap kind of stuff here that I use to put temporary builds together like this, so that at least I do have something on there, but I don't recommend you go out and use some of this. I generally use Arctic's MX4. It's quite old now, but it's very good stuff on normal builds, or you should get thermal paste with your actual cooler itself, so you could just use that as well. There are many different ways of applying thermal paste, but technically thermal paste is literally there just to give you a proper contact with the CPU and cooler to transfer the heat from one to the other. Now that we've actually got our CPU in there and we've got our cooler, we do need to just make sure this cooler is set up correctly. When you purchase them new, they will come set up correctly, and it's very easy to fit. We first need to install some of our thermal paste. Like I say, if you are using a stock Intel cooler, they generally come with their own, but if you do ever need to replace it, you'll need to know this process anyway. The simplest way of doing thermal paste is just getting your stick and putting a blob in the middle. Again, there are many different methods of doing this. This is not generally the way that I do it, but it is the safest way of doing it, particularly for a newbie out there, and it's pretty much going to work perfectly fine for you. But generally what I would do is I would use a spatula, because a lot of thermal paste does come with a spatula, to make sure it's nice and smooth across the CPU so that you've got full contact across. But we're not going to do that today. We're just going to show you the blob technique. I know many of you out there do use different techniques. Everybody has their own method. I want to know them, so also let me know in the comments below, what kind of method do you use to apply thermal paste if you've done it before, because it'd be really interesting to know which ones are more successful than others. But to actually install the CPU cooler here, we do need to show you a little bit on the motherboard. The CPU coolers themselves will come with little pegs on them, and this one comes with 4, and you have 4 holes on your motherboard in each corner. That will actually locate into there, and then it will actually secure it down. If you're fitting any other type of cooler, they will come with their own brackets and back plates and things like that that will fit that kind of dimensions. That is also the same for all of the other motherboards. AM5 does use a slightly different system, because you can have 2 different types of coolers on them. You can either remove the current brackets on the motherboard, and you can install one just like you can with Intel, where you have a back plate and it goes through the motherboard, or you can actually get ones that hook down, but that again is for a different video. To install this cooler now, all we need to do is simply align the little pegs up to the little holes. This is not always the most simplest thing with an Intel stock cooler, but there we go, we've got them aligned. Lay your motherboard down and then just push each corner in, and it should lock down the cooler itself. You will know that it's locked down because you will hear a click just in each corner, and that cooler is locked down now. If you look at the back, you can actually see that there are the little pegs that have come for the board, and when you pushed those little things down and you heard the click, it was actually snapping these open so that it holds on to the motherboard. Once you've installed the cooler, of course, you need to plug the fan in. This fan in particular is a 4-pin PWM one. That is generally the standard nowadays for most fans, to be honest, and it means that the motherboard can talk to the fan, know what speed it's doing, and adjust that speed depending on the temperature of the CPU. Most motherboards will have a CPU header, and we have one just at the top here. We actually have 2. We have CPU opt and CPU fan. So we're going to plug straight into the CPU fan. Another thing that I like to do is just tuck and hide the cable away on these. You probably won't need to do that if you do have a tower cooler or something like that. There'll be a totally different process, but generally that is how you install a stock Intel cooler, and that's going to work perfectly fine. They're not the greatest coolers, to be honest, but they will get you up and running, particularly if you are new to building a PC. The next step for me in building this is installing the storage, and for that we're going to be using an NVMe drive. These are very small drives that actually go onto your motherboard. You can get the older types like the SATA connection ones or the hard drives. I'm going to go with this at the moment because we are doing a modern guide here, and this is generally what most people are going to be using with a modern gaming PC. But again, we will get into how to install other things later on if you guys want it. Now, to install on this motherboard, it is a little bit weirder than some of them out there, particularly the more budget type boards. We do have 3 NVMe slots on this board. The 2 at the bottom don't come with any additional heat sinks, and the one at the top does, that we need to remove. To remove the heatsink off the top of this motherboard, we do need to undo this screw here. That's going to be pretty much the same for most motherboards if you have a heatsink on there. If you don't have a heatsink on your motherboard, then you can get them separately and you can attach them to your NVMe drive if it doesn't actually come with one, because you can buy them with heat sinks on. The heat sinks on these generally just help draw the heat out of the NVMe drive to make sure that it maintains its speeds and things. But all we need to do is just undo that screw, slide this one out. On the bottom it has a sticky heat pad which is going to stick to the NVMe drive and transfer that heat across. We need to slide the NVMe drive into its slot, lower it down, and then you will actually get a little screw with the motherboard to hold it down. Now, if you don't get a little screw with your motherboard, or if you've lost it, you can purchase new ones. You can get spares and things like that. Or if you are purchasing a crucial drive like the one that we've got here, they actually do come with them. Some NVMe drives do come with a spare screw just in case. To put the heatsink back on again, we just need to slide it into there, add a little pressure down onto the drive so that the contact pad reaches it, and then do the screw back up. That will now give us a working drive in our top slot here. That is a PCI Gen 4 slot as well, so you're going to get the full potential of a PCI Gen 4 SSD if you were to do it. That's generally the setup that a lot of motherboards have. Some do have full PCI Gen 4 slots on them. It depends how premium you're going. For a mid-range board like this, it's just the top one. The rest of them are PCI Gen 3 and will actually fit the drives in exactly the same way. So if you do want to expand the storage on a board like this, you can just keep adding drives into those slots. The next thing that I do is I actually install the memory. For this one, we're actually going for 2 sticks, even though the motherboard will support up to 4. If you are putting 4 sticks into a motherboard, you can pretty much use any slots you want. But if you are going to only be installing 2, your motherboard manual will tell you which are the primary slots to use. We are using 2, of course, and we're going to be using this HyperX Fury. It is DDR4. It doesn't matter if you're using DDR3 or DDR5. It's exactly the same process to install them. The RAM modules themselves come with a little notch in the end here. That's going to denote what type of memory it is and where it fits on the board. It's also going to denote which direction and which way round the actual memory is going to slot, because you do need to line up the memory with this little slot so that you know you've got it the right way round. On motherboards, when you're installing 2 sticks, remember they do need to go in the right slots. For this motherboard, it is miss out the first one and go for the second one, miss out the third one, go for the fourth one. That is actually meaning that these are going to run in dual channel to get the full speeds here. If you do put them together, they're going to be on the same channel, so you're not going to get a dual channel performance. But to install the memory, all you need to do is simply click these little slots back. Some motherboards only come with 1, some come with 2, like this one. Locate the memory down, making sure that the little notch is in the right place, slide it into the clips, and then push it down with a bit of pressure. Pushing it down with pressure will actually pop the little clips back up again, and it'll grip onto the memory, and then it is actually installed. With the CPU installed and the cooler, the SSD installed and the memory, that's pretty much a motherboard built, unless you're going to install anything else on here, so some extra NVMe drives or extra RAM sticks. You're pretty much good to go with this motherboard. So now all we need to do is get it into a case and fit everything else with it. For the case for this build, we're going to go for this one. This is from Tecware, and I want to thank them again for sending it across for this demonstration. The reason that we went for this case in particular is because it is a dual chamber case, and that is the trend at the moment. Lots of people are actually going for dual chamber cases. It's got plenty of space in it, and we can remove the panels so that you guys can see exactly what we're doing. To install a motherboard into a case, you do have these little pegs inside here. You need to make sure that they align to the motherboard that you're using. If you are using an ATX case, just like this one, which we need for our ATX motherboard, you can still fit a micro ATX or an ITX board in there if you want to, all you need to do is just move these pegs. Fortunately for us, Tecware have already provided them in the place of an ATX board, but if you do need to move them, they will provide accessories. They will come with a little locking key. You can undo them, screw them back into somewhere else, so it's always worth just measuring up your motherboard first to make sure everything aligns. Now, when fitting a motherboard into a case, I like to lay the case down. Some people don't, they actually have them stood up, but I think it's just much easier for you to install things. Our motherboard itself does come with a fixed IO shield here. If your motherboard doesn't, which only real kind of budget boards don't anymore, most motherboards will come with a fixed IO shield. You will need to install the IO shield at the back there first, but for us it's going to be as simple as just laying our motherboard down and sliding it into place. As we can see, each of the little connections and little stands that we made sure that were installed before all align up, and then we just need to screw the motherboard down. Cases do actually come with the screws required to do this, or they generally do. If you don't, you should probably talk to the manufacturer about it to get some spares. But they are generally these type of screws that are the ones that we need to install. They're the ones with a little kind of collar around the side, and all we do is we drop them down and we screw the motherboard down. A little tip for doing this to make sure that you don't kind of de-thread anything is that you drop the screw into the hole, you go back a couple of turns till the screw clicks, and then you go forward again. That will make sure that the screw lines up, and there's a little tip and trick that people don't generally tell you, but I will here. With the motherboard installed now, we are ready to install the next part, and for that I generally install the power supply. The power supply, of course, that we're going to be using is this one from Be Quiet here. It is a very good power supply, probably way too much for the system that we're putting together here, but it is always good to have a good power supply. One of the good pieces of advice is for anybody out there building a gaming PC, whether it's a budget system or not, is make sure you don't skimp on the power supply, because if the power supply itself has any kind of issues, it could blow the rest of the system, and then building a budget system didn't make any sense at all, because you're not going to get any kind of replacements on warranties for that. So always make sure that you use a decent power supply. If you're unsure about which type of power supply to go for, because even sometimes the ratings on them don't even actually make any sense to what kind of quality are inside them, make sure you go for a decent brand. Definitely go check out Be Quiet. They are one of the most recommended power supply manufacturers out there, so you're not going to go wrong with one of them, and I'm sure they would give you some kind of advice on which kind of model you would need for the system, or you could just watch some more videos like this, because I'm sure there are lots out there where people tell you what to use. Now, when deciding what actual power supply to go for, it's not just the rating and the quality that you need to be aware of, you do also need to be aware of the type. This one is what we call a fully modular power supply. These are my most favorite ones to use, to be honest. I don't like too many cables in a system. It actually means that the cables here are separate to the power supply itself, and you plug the ones that you need into the power supply and then into the system. You can also get semi-modular ones, which generally have the 24 pin, which is a mandatory one, and your EPS, and one for your PCIe, which is for your graphics cards and stuff. They will actually be connected to the unit, and everything else will be plugged in if you need it. Or you can get non-modular ones where all of the cables together are actually in the unit. They are the most painful ones to actually cable manage afterwards, because for every cable that you don't use, and as you can imagine just from this there are quite a few here, you will need to cable manage them away and do something with them so that you can get a decent airflow through, as well as making sure the system is nice and tidy as well. Now, because we are using a fully modular unit, we will need the 24 pin that's going to provide the main power to our motherboard, and we'll need to install that. We will also need an 8 pin for our EPS that's going to provide power to the CPU. The graphics card we're using doesn't use anything fancy. We do have a number of other VGA ones here. We have one here for the new standard on the NVIDIA graphics cards, the 12VH thingy that's a bit weird. We're not going to be using that because our graphics card doesn't use it. And then we have lots of other cables here. This is an 8 pin for your graphics card. This one is an 8 pin for your graphics card, and it has the connection on there. I do believe this graphics card that we're using only has one 8 pin, so unfortunately I think we might actually have one somewhere. So this one here is not the same. That is actually a CPU one as well. That is actually an 8 pin CPU one that doesn't have the split, so we're probably going to use that one instead of the one with the split. We will need to use one of these for our graphics cards. Even though we're only going to use one of the 8 pins, we will have to hide the other cable. A lot of power supplies do come with these separate. I don't know why Be Quiet have included them together. Probably because anybody actually purchasing one of these 850 watt units are probably using a very high rated graphics card, which will require multiple connections, but of course we only need them. If you are using a fully modular unit, or if you are using a semi-modular unit, when coming to plug cables in, you need to make sure that you follow the exact names on the side of here. It does have the little pictures or the little words, if you flip that around there, it does have the little words of exactly which cable to plug in, and generally they do have it written on the side of the plug. If you get these plugged in wrong, which you shouldn't be able to because they generally come with the right size connections and stuff, you could potentially blow up your power supply and your system along with it. That's why you should never use different cables from a different power supply manufacturer. Always use the cables that came with your power supply, because if they swap the pins in them, you could still blow up your motherboard and stuff. But generally all you do is you just plug them into the power supply like this. They'll just go in one way and they'll click in like that. That's our VGA one done. Then we've got our EPS one, which is going to go into one of here. It does have a number written on it. It's got P8, so we're going to put that in the P8 slot. That one's going to go in there. And then we've got the motherboard one here, which actually has an 8-pin and a 20-pin. So they're going to go into here. Their ones are denoted by MB for motherboard. So we'll just click that one into there, and we'll click that one into there. Once you've got these cables installed, again, you can do this different ways. You don't need to install these straight away. If you've got space in your case, you can just install the power supply first, then the cables second. But I'm not quite sure what space we have in this case yet, so I'm going to install them first, and then we'll show you how to route them around the system. With the back of the system here, you can see that there's a big jumbling of wires. These are actually all of the ones for the motherboard, where you're going to connect up your front I/O, any kind of fans that are pre-installed. So we've got one that actually does connect them all together here. It's a big, massive block there. We're not going to worry too much about that for now. We're going to just tuck them away up there, and that way we won't have to worry about them for a minute. Get them out of the way for us installing our power supply, and we're going to move these cables to the side. I generally fit the big cables first when I come to do cable management, and then I route all the little ones around afterwards. So that's what we're going to do today. To install the power supply, we need to just flip it over, because we want the fan on the outside here so that it can draw air in and it'll blow it out the back. And for a dual chamber case like this, all you need to simply do is just line it up into the back there, and then slide it into the back of the system. Sliding the power supply into the back of the system, you will see that it will line up to some screw holes here. The screws again do come with your case, although some PSU manufacturers do include them with the power supply. You simply need to hold your power supply into place and then just screw each of these into the back. Again, every case is different. Some cases, particularly the ones that are normal towers, not the dual chambers, will come with a little panel that you take off the back. You literally just unscrew them with thumb screws, mount that to the power supply first, and then the power supply itself slides into the back of the system. If you have been watching our videos, you've seen us do that before in others, when we've particularly used things like fractal cases or cases from Be Quiet. They're generally high-end premium cases, do have that kind of mechanism, but for general purpose, most of the time you just need to install them like that. Now that we've got all the cables all set up in there and the power supply in, we do need to feed all of the cables through to the motherboard. The main 24 pin generally comes through the side here, and your case will have little slots on it. The best thing to do is double check on the other side of your kind of case here to see where the motherboard slot is. For us, it's going to be at the top here, so we are going to run this cable through into there. Your 8-pin EPS cable will always go through the top here. They generally are at the top of the motherboard on the left hand side, so we're going to locate that all the way up to the top there, pop it through. And then when it comes to your VGA cables, one of the ones here we do want to just get rid of for a minute, because our graphics card doesn't actually use any more than 8 pins, so we're going to just tuck that away underneath the power supply for now. And then we're going to mount this one through the bottom, somewhere down here, through a little kind of crevice, and that will actually go underneath the graphics card, come around the other side and plug in. Flipping the case round, we can see the different cables that have come out, and we do need to plug them into the motherboard. They will only go one way onto a motherboard as long as you've got the right cable through, and they do have these little clips on them that will lock them into place. For the EPS one, you want to go at the top of the motherboard here, just move it round, click it into the board just like that, and then I like to feed as much of the cable back as possible to keep the front clean. We can cable manage in the back better than we can do in the front. We do the same for the 24 pin. We just need to attach this little 4-pin one there, because they for some reason do actually have an extra 4-pin. What you want to do here is kind of bend it over and kind of mount it into that socket there. And then for the PCI Express one, we'll leave that one for now because we haven't installed the graphics card. We'll leave it where it is. Sometimes if you do have a fully modular power supply, lots of people do like to fit these cables first to the motherboard, then bring them through to the back and then plug them into the power supply. You can do it either way that you want to. Sometimes it's easier the one way. It completely depends on the setup of your case. With the power cables now all aligned, I just like to tuck these wires into little places. You can use the little pegs and things on the motherboard to pin them down, but for now we're just going to temporarily put them there because we could do cable management later. I generally like to install them first, know where they're going, and then I install the smaller ones here. This case doesn't come with USB-C, strangely enough, so we don't have to worry about that. For most modern systems, you will need to worry about USB-C. It's very similar to USB, it just plugs straight on your motherboard. We do have a USB 3 though. We have all of the front I/O connections, and then we have a HD audio. There is no USB 2 on this system, otherwise it would look very similar to the HD audio. You will need to kind of line these up through the case to wherever your motherboard is. Generally, the HD audio one will go through the bottom at the back there, so we'll line that up through a hole and we'll plug that in. The front I/O panels generally are either on the side of the motherboard or at the bottom on the right, so we'll make sure that they align and go through a little slot here. And on this motherboard in particular, the USB 3 is actually on the side near the power connection, so that one is going to go round on itself and go through pretty much the same hole as the connection for the ATX power. It's actually really nice to use a case like this that has lots of space, because it means we can feed all the cables through perfectly fine. We've had no issues so far of doing it at all. Here's our USB 3 connection here. It's going to plug simply into that kind of hole there. You just need to flip it round and plug it in. That's probably one of the most simplest ones. Then we have the HD audio, which plugs in very similar again. It just mounts itself onto pins, and it does have a little blank in there so that you can't get it the wrong way around. Same as the USB 3, so both of them are actually plugged in. The most complex one though comes with the front panel, and that's purely because it is the same process of just pushing them onto pins, but you have to know which pins they are, so you need to read the motherboard manual and also look at each one of them to see which one goes where. Generally, the power switch goes on the 2 pins down here on the front I/O on the right hand side of the pins, so we'll plug that one in. The reset switch goes underneath it. The hard drive LED ones go in next to the reset switch on the left hand side, and the power LED ones go on the left hand side of the power switch. With all the cables now actually connected to the motherboard, I like to just make sure that they're fed as far back as possible. Make sure that nothing is tied up. You've got lots of space inside the case and air can flow perfectly fine. Now the back of the case does look a bit of a mess, and like I said before, we're not going to be doing cable management here. All you can do is a very simple thing. It's just make sure that you tuck them away, if like that, and pin them down with a bit of Velcro. We did have a bit of Velcro somewhere, but for now I'm going to use this little taggy that came with the motherboard. They're generally useful if you don't have any extra kind of things. Just tag it around like that. That's going to keep those cables out of the way of these fans. A case like this is fantastic to build in due to the amount of space that you purely have. If we were building this into some of the more budget kind of friendly tower cases, we'd have to do a lot more work than this, but generally I think that actually looks pretty tidy as it is. So we've got the motherboard installed and we've got the power supply installed. We've got all of the cables plugged in, including the front I/O for the case. So most of the difficult parts are now actually done. But there is one last thing that you need to do to make this, of course, a gaming PC, and that is install a graphics card. For the graphics card, we've gone for this Gigabyte one here. It's an RTX 4060. It's nothing special out there. It's pretty much entry level nowadays, but I think it goes nice with this motherboard and it will be great for the demonstration that we're going to be doing. To install a graphics card, when they turn up, you will have some little rubber plugs in the end of your connections. You don't need to remove them yet, but you'll also have a little rubber protection on top of the PCIe connection here. You will need to remove that first. Then in your case, you will need to remove some of these back panels here. Some cases don't come with fancy ones like this. They will come with these little bend out snappy things. You will need to bend them out. Be careful that it's not going to touch anything on the motherboard. If you are worried about that, then do it before you've actually installed the motherboard. For us though, we've simply got these nicely screwed in ones. What you will need to do is you will need to kind of locate where your PCI Express slot is, and we're going to go for this top one here. It actually aligns up to the top 2 here, so we'll need to remove them. This is a dual slot card, so we'll need to remove 2 of the PCI covers. If you have a triple slot card, you'll need to remove 3. And to do that, we simply need to just get the screwdriver in here, undo the screws and take the little slots out. Flip the graphics card over, we line it up to the actual PCI Express slot itself and the back plate, and we simply just put a little bit of pressure on it to push it into that slot. That will actually lock the graphics card into the slot. It has a little flip over, and then we take the screws that we took out of the system originally and we put them back in the graphics card to lock it into place. Now if you don't get the little cards here with the little screws on them, you do actually need to use some extras from the case. They are generally the same ones that you get with a power supply, so the ones that you fit the power supply with, you'll also use the same ones to fit the graphics card. With the graphics card installed into the actual slot, we'll need to connect the graphics card power supply up, and of course we put this cable through previously. This one is a split cable, but all we need to do is kind of hold them together there, flip the cable around and plug it into the slot. That will now provide power to the graphics card itself, and I like to just tuck the cables back in. You can take the back off the case here if you want to be able to pull those cables through, make sure everything's tight. But generally, that is the last step of building a gaming PC. I don't know what you guys think, but I think this system actually looks pretty good, and hopefully now you guys have learned, for anybody new out there to come into building PCs, that this is a very simple process to do. There's nothing overly complex in putting a gaming PC together. The most fragile pieces are, of course, when installing that CPU. Make sure you don't drop anything onto the little spring pins, and if you are using an AM4, make sure that you don't bend any of the pins on the CPU. If you do struggle with an AM4 putting it into the motherboard, chances are you could already have a bent pin, and then you have to do some extra work to fix it. I'm not going to go through that on this video, but let me know in the comments below what you think, guys. Is this system actually something that looks pretty good? I think it is. Although it's irrelevant of what actual parts are in this system, because this video is of course a guide on how to put it together. The next stages of this, of course, is installing your operating system, getting your games launchers on there, making sure you get drivers and stuff. We're not going to cover that in this video today, but if you do want us to cover that whole process, what to do after you've built your gaming PC, let me know in the comments below and we'll put a video together for that. Again, it will come from the perspective of what we do and what we install, and everybody has their own little flavor of it, so you can always adapt these things as you go. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content and you want to catch any more of our guides going forward. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you have learned a lot through it, and I hope a bunch of new builders can use this kind of video to get into the actual genre.